All right, so before we start, I just want to get a sense of the audience here. How many of you, just by show of hands, how many of you have recently successfully completed a server virtualization project? Okay, wow. Is what? Fair point. Executed? You're right, completed, maybe not. Okay, good point. All right, so most of you have, in fact, or a great number of you have done a server virtualization project recently. So by show of hands, how many of you have also executed some sort of desktop virtualization project? Oh, you guys are rock stars. Okay, and so the rest of you are here to see if you should, I assume, right? Okay, good. All right. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to arm you with the facts and figures to let you assemble your strategy, mistakes not to make, maybe entertain you just a little bit, but show you lots of data. And we engineers love data, and we hate marketing people who say this something is the best reason for it. So there's going to be none of that. If there is, you can throw whatever you have at me. All right. So we're just about there. Just by way of introduction, my name's Jeff McNaught. I've been with Wise for 23 years, started as a hardware and software designer. I joined the dark side of sales and marketing about a decade ago. Co-inventor of the original thin client. The client, in fact, or the product, in fact, that is patented by Wise and all devices from all vendors that are derivative of this. So I know a little bit about this space, and I have a really strong opinion on most things in this space. So we can really get into it and have some fun because there are a lot of different answers to a lot of these questions, and sometimes more than one is right. So what I really want to do is talk a little bit about the market and what's happening and what's going on. But before that, I've got just a little bit of thanks to say. This has been a very tough economy, and I think most of us know that sort of firsthand. And in Silicon Valley, I work in a company that is surrounded by the other big Silicon Valley companies, which we've watched so many people leave those companies. Wise has been lucky because of the market that we're in, the partners we have, and folks like you to be able to make our numbers every quarter for the last 2 years, and the last 2 years have been record years for us as a company. And I think it's because of what we're trying to do in this industry. Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Do you recognize this product at all? So if you've been in the labs, VMware has like 400 of these things in the labs running all of the different lab technologies. This is, of course, the number one selling Zero client for VMware View. If you had any question about it, we sell more of these by noon the first day of the quarter than the next Zero client seller sells in the entire quarter, just so you know. And it's called the Wise P20. The P20 uses a Teradici Terra 1 chip inside it. It does native PC over IP, and it's a really, really sharp product. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, go down and take a quick look at that. Wise, our company, in fact, for the first half of this calendar year, which is kind of all of this year that we have so far, we are number one in the U.S. for Zero and thin client shipments. I have never seen so many banners claiming companies are number one in this, number that, one in that, but here's mine. And it's true. PocketCloud. Now, how many of you, by show of hands, know what PocketCloud is? Oh, you guys rock. Okay, you're in exactly the right place. So PocketCloud, PocketCloud has blown away all of our expectations. In fact, we have over 110,000 downloads. And PocketCloud is amazingly a top 10 iTunes app for business. So thank you for all of those of you who use PocketCloud. And now my gift back to you, PocketCloud 2.0. PocketCloud 2.0 is the biggest advance in PocketCloud since we introduced the product. We have gotten so much feedback on PocketCloud that we have seen the kind of the model shift from PocketCloud being Pandora for geeks, right, because you know exactly what I'm talking about, to being a product that actual consumers use. So, my dad is in the healthcare industry. He's a doctor, and he wouldn't understand a computer if you hit him across the face with it. And so we needed to make PocketCloud address the sorts of things that real consumers, and that, quite frankly, we're all consumers on the weekends as well. We wanted to make PocketCloud deliver those consumer things. So the first thing we built into it for 2.0 is the file browser. You want to find a file on your PC remotely? Any file, I don't care what it is. PocketCloud has this new interface. Don't have to go through clicking and dragging and all that. New interface pops up. High-speed search across the entire, your system. Okay, yeah, you've heard that before. So that's good and very practical. Video. PocketCloud now does video. And that means that if you have a WMV file or an AVI file or what have you on your PC or your virtual environment. So let me just quickly remind, for those of you that don't know what PocketCloud is a software product that loads onto an iOS device, iPod, iPhone, iPad, that lets you remotely access that device and control it. So it could be your personal PC, it can be your terminal services environment, your remote desktop services environment, your VMware View environment, and a few other things. And so now we introduce video, which means video that doesn't run on the iPad or iPod or iPhone now runs. And it runs fast, and it runs great, over 3G and over Wi-Fi. So you've got to see this. And the third thing we introduced was easy setup. This we built for my dad. And because how many of you who want to remotely control your PC at home know how to punch holes through routers and the IP addresses and how to figure, oh, yes, of course you do. Right? The engineers in the audience will certainly know this. But you know what? My dad doesn't. So we made it so that all you have to do is on your PC that you want to control with PocketCloud, enter your Gmail address, and you all have one, and enter your password, and then do the same thing on PocketCloud, and we automatically transfer all the data in between, set it up one time, it's all done. Now you can go ahead and access it anytime. You didn't have to know anything. So those are just 3 of the myriad new cool features of PocketCloud 2, which will be on the iTunes App Store any day now. Like I said, it's been submitted to Apple. For those of you that already own the product, free upgrade, have a ball. And we're also introducing some new things for folks to reduce the price of the product. Also, okay, here it comes, Android. PocketCloud 1.0 for Android being released here at the show. It is already up in the Android market and available. There's 2 versions, a free version and a version that you can pay for, which adds extra features, VMware security and such. So pretty powerful stuff. So I wanted to share those sorts of things with you. Now let's get to the key topic of the day. Why is cloud client computing? Or as I like to call it, W3C. Okay, what the heck is Jeff talking about? Here's what we've learned. We've learned as we are a vendor, and in the old days, quite frankly, we were a vendor whose salesperson would walk into your office and say, the thin client is the answer, now what's the question? But what's changed now is that we realize that it's a not a one-size-fits-all kind of environment. And in fact, there are multiple models that you need to be considering if you're going to look at doing real virtualization. And some of them are named VDI, but not all of them. And so we've developed a technology, or sort of a strategy, if you will, called W3C that takes the benefits of sort of thin and zero client computing, which we've been doing for years, and adds to that desktop virtualization, okay, and unified communications. 2 technologies that you probably understand pretty well today, and 1 technology that you're absolutely going to be using in the future. And so we wanted to get there in advance. And so why is cloud client computing? Let me put it a different way. Take your PC, and you've seen this done 1,000 times, right? And it essentially has 4 components, right? There's the hardware, there's the operating system, there's the applications, and the content. And so we're going to break the chain around all of that and create a server. So we want to move the content, that's personalization, that's your special files and such, the applications and the OS to the cloud. Now, I'm not always talking about the public cloud. I think that's far too many people jump to that conclusion. We're talking about the private cloud, which is the data center you already have in your building, right? Or it could be a hybrid cloud down the road, certainly public and government. So there's the server side of the equation. Now, to create the client side or the endpoint side, you take a little tiny piece of software, you glue it to a piece of hardware, and of course, now lately we're taking that software and making that component less and less even relevant or visible, and you have now the cloud client, okay, which looks a lot like a thin client, quite frankly. But there are several different versions, and I'm going to go into this to help you understand which one makes the most sense for you. Now, the way this works is, I'm sure you're all aware, there's a protocol that connects between the server and the client device that makes it work. And if you choose the right protocol and the right endpoint device, it's going to work not only for your wired networks as well as your wireless networks. So here's point 1. When you're talking to endpoint vendors, if they can't support wireless networks, how likely are you to use this kind of a device for the next 8 years, which is the natural life cycle of thin client devices, or these thin devices on this environment? So point 1, avoid anything that can't do Wi-Fi. Okay. The second thing you want to really understand is that not all of your applications are going to run perfectly on the server. And that we have customers that come in and they say, I want to run everything on the desktop. Okay. We want to run everything on the server. Okay. And there are others that they'll have a perspective on a mix. And so cloud client computing uses a mix of architectures to be able to give you that solution. It enables you, in fact, to decide where the apps will execute. Using a combination of techniques like VDI mixed with OS and application streaming, you can dynamically provision your virtual machines, reducing the need for Tier 1 storage, but you can also provision endpoint devices in real time so that applications that simply won't execute on the server can be executed on the endpoint. And maybe if you're just doing that for a year or two while that application is being rewritten. Now, when you take this kind of approach, you get the benefit of not only using one of these cloud client devices, but you could also use a repurposed PC, and I'll show you how we do that. You can use a mobile device, and of course, a lot of emphasis now on using devices, the slate type of devices, and naturally the phone type of devices. So all of these now deliver the true anywhere, anytime element of virtualization. Okay, so this is pretty cool. So where does it go from here? Well, ultimately, one of the things that we think is a breakthrough that we've been working on so very hard is the concept of taking voice, data, and video and making it all work on these skinny type of devices. And so as we build this voice, data, and video capability into the endpoint devices, what we really start to be able to deliver is the capability that your boss is going to come to you and start asking for over the next couple of years. And that is dealing with that thing right there. Right? Virtualization is neato, but it's not the end game. The end game is getting everything into one simple access model for your users that they can get while they're in the office, when they're out of the office, and when they're at the movies. And so we're going to take and move that phone right into the device electronics, and we've already started shipping thin client devices with that capability built into the hardware that we're going to turn on later on. And so the idea is that desktop virtualization becomes desk virtualization. Now, no, I'm not trying to create a brand new term for the industry. You're not going to see the Wall Street Journal talk about desk virtualization, but you get the idea. Take the PC, take the phone, blend them both into a very simple device, virtualize all the hard stuff back in the data center, and now what you've created is an environment where people truly can work anywhere and anytime, from the telephonic and where are they kind of aspects to the traditional computing. And that's really what we're focusing on at Wise. So we're no longer that kind of endpoint company as much as we are a company that can help you really make maximum benefit out of virtualization. Now, this sort of approach has really got the analysts excited. This happens to be Gartner Data, and what they're forecasting is a 5-fold increase in this space because of these kinds of concepts. And so they're excited, you should be excited, but here's the question that you're all here to get the answer to. Where's the ROI? And how do I measure it? The first thing is understand how to measure it and understand the pieces in play. I talk to CIOs all day in my strategy capacity, and so many of them simply don't understand what to measure so that they can do a proper comparison. So this particular URL is sort of my second big point for you guys. This is a URL that resides at a Linnean, and it is an ROI tool that is free, that is built from IDC data on real customers who went from PCs only to virtualization environments. So it doesn't have some wise product manager's, clever math in it. It's an actual comparison of VMware, Citrix, Microsoft, and OS and application streaming, also called cloud PC technologies. And what it does is it helps you understand the things to measure. It helps you understand where you're going to save the most money, and it helps you fine-tune things. It'll ask you what you pay your people. It'll ask you how many people you have. It'll ask you what industry you're in. It asks a lot of questions. It's kind of like a mother-in-law. However, the outcome is much, much better, right? And that is going to give you a set of charts and graphs, I mentioned it earlier on, that will help you articulate the benefits of why you're doing all this to your CIO and your CFO in the terms that they understand. So it's a really, really good tool. So let's talk about the downside of VDI that some of us are experiencing today. I talk to more than a small number of CIOs who come in and say, hey, Jeff, we tried the VDI thing. It didn't really work. It was slow, and it seemed to be really expensive, and it was extraordinarily complex. And the first question I always ask them is, so what was your storage strategy? And that's a topic for another session. And then what's your endpoint strategy? And that's the topic for this session. And I usually get this kind of answer. We put PCs on the end of the endpoints. And so if you sort of walk through the analysis, you see how completely ridiculous that is. From a complexity standpoint, moving the desktops to the server has increased the server complexity somewhat. I think we would all agree there's a little more to do on the server once you implement VDI. But the endpoint is still just as bad. You didn't gain anything. You still have a tremendous amount of work to do in maintaining, managing, patching, and dealing with these endpoint devices. Security is the same thing. You've improved the security model substantially, but you're still using an unsecure endpoint. And so you haven't moved forward. From a management standpoint, yes, management is easier of virtual desktops in a properly architected server, but you're still managing all those endpoints as well now as your virtual images. So you've really taken a big step backwards. From a reliability standpoint, you now have the ability to do server failover and you things like vMotion and such, which is very cool and adds a tremendous amount of flexibility and agility to your environment. But you're still feeding a complicated endpoint that needs to have its hard disk fixed, its RAM upgraded, and all these other things that break. So where'd you get? From a deployment standpoint, yes, adding users to the system becomes much, much faster, but you still have to get out the old Norton Ghost to get that endpoint working. And come on, that doesn't make any sense. And from a green IT standpoint, you've gone backwards. Your carbon emissions in this model are higher than they were when you were PC only. So don't do it. Here's the better answer. Use any number of endpoint devices that are thin in nature. Use Apple iPads. That's one way to do it. And look at the analysis when you're doing this. So from a complexity standpoint, yes, we've increased complexity at the server, but we've dramatically reduced complexity at the endpoint. You've eliminated most of the economic burdens on managing the endpoint with this sort of approach. And I'll talk about different zero clients and things like that so you can see your options there. From a security standpoint, these thin devices at the endpoint will actually enforce your security policies, whereas PC, gosh, how can you really make that happen? From a management standpoint, that endpoint device now is almost not needed to be managed, or it's centrally managed. So that dramatically simplifies the equation. Reliability, so you get the failover reliability I talked about in the last slide, and now you've got a device on the desktop that has a real MTBF. Now, for those of you in the engineering community, MTBF, you know that. It's mean time between failure. It's our way of measuring reliability. And a good PC will have 30 to 40,000 hours of MTBF. A good thin client will have, 80 to 375,000 hours of MTBF. Far, far better. Much more reliable, much easier. It's like Ron Popeil's Showtime oven that you see at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's set it and forget it. And that's the whole point here. So deployment actually becomes instant and very, very easy. And I'm going to talk a lot more about green. But this is the reality. Back in 1996, when we really first introduced this in volume, the green story was not as good as it is today. What you essentially did was you replaced heavy power-using PCs with thin client devices, and the energy curve went down dramatically. But you went and built these giant data centers with these sort of server architectures, and your power profile went way up there. Today, it's different. Today, using Intel Xeon 5500, 5600 technology and similar, you have a much, much better power profile. We ran the numbers with real customers, and we found that on average, a VDI environment server power utilization is 20 to 30 watts per user, per active user. Right? You start with 1,000, but if you support 300 users on that server, like you might do with the Citrix XenApp 64, you get a real good number. And of course, that's an example. But what we find is when you look across the board, about 20 to 30 watts per user. Compare that and add that to the 7 watts for the thin client device, and you've now reduced the energy up to 90%. And what that means in real terms, and the analysts all agree on this point, is that you'll save $70 to $150 in real energy per client per year. That's real money. You have 5,000 users over the period of the life of these devices, you'll save $3 million in energy alone. That's real numbers. And that's the kind of stuff that can wake up your CFO when you're talking about green. Because they think what you mean is you're going to go hug trees. No. So it all kind of bakes into the overall value proposition of the virtualization model. Right? The idea is that you want to be able to save real money, deliver real business benefits at the same time. And those of you with a lot of experience in IT know that that's not usually the case. If you buy a product that's going to save you money, you lose features. Or if you buy a product that's going to give you a lot of features, you spend a ton of money. Fortunately, virtualization isn't exactly that way when architected correctly. So this is the result here on the left-hand side of some numbers from the IDC research that I mentioned earlier. They took real customers, smallest customers, 30 users. The biggest one was 25,000 users, and asked them all of the right questions to understand what benefits they really gained by moving from a PC-only environment to an environment with thin devices and virtualization. And what they found was that operating expenses dropped pretty dramatically. Now let me stop for a breath here. Many of your bosses are looking for a big CapEx hit, right? The capital expenses associated with moving to the next role. Because you're going to implement a fairly good-sized data center in most of these models, you can expect to maybe save 5% in your CapEx, but you're not going to save these giant hits like the 40% numbers that we talk about in CapEx. You're going to save that in OpEx. And if you don't properly measure those numbers, you can get really tied up in the whole CFO trap. So when you're going to make this change, make it on a clean refresh cycle. Like you're all planning your Windows 7 refreshes, and some of you already went to Vista. You have my condolences. I'll send a card later. But the right time to do this is when you were going to write a really big check to buy a bunch of PCs and then not buy the PCs, buy the data center, right? And then we've got a whole lot of different ways for you to solve the endpoint point. So here's what we found, though. Yes, OpEx went down a significant amount. And a lot of that savings had to do with better productivity and what happened in the IT department. For instance, there was a 29% reduction in IT operations costs because the IT department, for many companies which spend their lives doing break-fix work, they're out there updating hard drives and RAM and replacing operating systems and resetting BIOS and all that kind of nonsense. And I used to be in IT as well. So I know exactly what this is like. It's a thankless, horrible job that you can never get off the treadmill. You go home at 10 o'clock at night, you kick the dog, and then you do it all the next day. After companies moved from the old PC model to the new virtualization model, this sort of activity stops. Because the endpoint device is so simple, you don't ever have to go out and visit it. The challenges that exist are largely moved to the data center, and there will be challenges and growing pains in implementing a technology like this, but they are surmountable. Then what we found was an 88% improvement in worker productivity, right? Or in this case, an 88% reduction in worker downtime. Come join us. And that was because these devices don't blue screen or crash or have all those sorts of problems that were already associated with the models we've used in the past. So now productivity goes up. Now, if you run a call center and you measure productivity by dollars per minute, this is huge. This is something that you put up on a big poster on the wall. And then lastly, there was a 78% increase in IT staff productivity. When we first started talking about this technology, the IT departments that were considering this were terrified that what was going to happen is that they'd all get laid off because these devices were so simple to manage that nobody would be needed, the whole desktop crew, out they go. That's not what's happened. What has really happened amongst the many, many companies that have deployed this technology is that the teams go from largely tactical in that sort of break-fix model to much more strategic. Companies become more agile, business alignment, application rollouts simply go faster. And so the IT department stops being kind of the goat and becomes the hero in many cases. And that's a role that, quite frankly, I'm sure many of you would find a welcome change. From a security and privacy standpoint, the virtualization model makes so much sense when you use the right endpoint because none of the user data that you need to protect has to go to the endpoint. If you're in a hospital or you're in a bank or you're in a retail institution that takes credit cards, there is new laws and compliance that prevent you from letting that data go to an endpoint or to go out of your control. You want an endpoint device that is going to, in fact, enforce your security policy and keep the data in the data center, but let users anywhere in the world who are authorized make the most use of it. From a compliance standpoint, you all know the figures. Sarbanes-Oxley, Basel II in banking, HIPAA in healthcare. The compliance is required. And the best way to deliver that, and quite frankly, those are our sort of biggest vertical markets, that's the way you do it. From a manageability standpoint, think of how you manage PCs. You take the PC out of the box, you add layers and layers of complexity to it in the form of additional software to manage it, and then put it out there and begin managing it. Well, thin clients were designed from day one, and trust me, I was there that day, to be managed centrally. And the idea is that we wanted to create a simple console that could do anything you needed to do to the thin client, change its configuration, update its firmware, anything you wanted to do. And we have a great product that does that. We have over 7 million licenses in the market. But what we're doing as an industry is going further than that. I'd like to put a big red X over the whole management thing altogether for thin clients and zero clients. And so we're developing products that simply don't need to be managed. And so big benefits are coming in that space. I talked about reliability. That's sort of an easy one. And rapid deployment you all understand, because once everything's set on the server, taking a thin client or a zero client out of the box and plugging it in and just having it work is really where you're all trying to get to. And that's where we are as an industry. That stuff is already handled. From a power, noise, and cooling, I'll talk about that. And ultimately now, because we have all these different options for endpoint devices, you get the real anywhere, anytime. Because, right, 3 years ago, anytime, anywhere access meant anytime you were in the office and anywhere you were at home, and that was it. And now it's all changed. You can do it from the beach. You can do it from the office if you actually have to go in. You can do it from the road, and virtualization is so freeing from this standpoint because we're all doing it for real. So let me talk about a couple of customers. A couple of those customers are in this room. So if I say anything wrong, they're going to jump out of their seats and call me a liar. And I know some of them are sitting right over there. So tell you about Jewelry Television. How many of you have heard of Jewelry TV? Jewelry TV is a super cool company because it's sort of the CSN and QVC of high-end jewelry. It's the kind of company you want to know about, but you don't want your spouse to know about, right? And so Jewelry TV had a problem. They were using PCs, and they were generating trouble tickets back to the vendors that provide them one a day, right? Not internal trouble tickets back to the supplying vendors. One problem every single day. And so they wanted to move the model to virtualization. And what they found, though, because they have a unique environment, which is a 300-unit user call center, and every worker of that call center, because they're a television program, needs to be able to see the program feed, the actual video that goes out over the airways to those 2 o'clock a.m., stayer-uppers. They have to be able to see that on each and every one of their 300 screens. They brought in all the usual suspects: Wise, HP, Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, yat. And at the end of the game, only Wise could do it, because only one company knows how to do multicast technology so that one video stream that had to be on all the devices could be managed by the network. And I'll show you exactly a little architecture slide later on how that all worked. But critically important to understand how to put these pieces together. Amerisure Insurance wanted to get off PCs entirely and make the big step. So they moved all 800 of their users off of PCs onto a virtualized environment in thin devices, some mobile and some desktop. Now, this was 4 years ago. Typically, what happens is Amerisure Insurance would write a $3 million check every 3-4 years to refresh their PCs. Well, 2009 rolled around. They got ready to write that $3 million check and tore it up because they simply didn't need to replace the endpoint devices. Everything was running so well, they're skipping an entire refresh cycle. And this is what everybody seems to be getting. When you architect it correctly, you'll skip an entire refresh cycle. That is CapEx data you could take to the bank. So point number 3 is CapEx savings are not immediate, but they really accrue in huge ways at your next refresh cycle. And if your management is not understanding that, tell them again. Okay? So Reed Group of companies, this is a group in the UK, does personnel management, does a lot of things, in fact. They saved over £250,000 in energy savings alone by moving to a virtualization environment. In fact, they were so successful that Prince Charles, I always think of the guy with the ears, Prince Charles did a speech and mentioned them by name because they had done more than any other vendor, apparently, in the UK on saving energy, and they did it in this model. Metro Health is a healthcare provider in the Detroit area, and they built a model using a combination of OS and application streaming and VDI and a number of other neat techniques to deliver instantaneous, very accurate, completely accurate in fact, electronic medical records to all of their 4,000 patient rooms at a moment's notice. The doctors could just walk up to a device, instantly be logged in, do their thing, walk away, instantly be logged out. Highly secure, highly safe. A major European bank, who is so big, they've asked us not to use their name a whole lot, has already saved, in the 5 years they've worked with us, $100 million in OpEx. So real dollars. And then lastly, the University of Arizona. Right? University of Arizona had an issue with the resident halls. And there's no more difficult environment to secure than a university, because the kids know more than we do, quite frankly, about technology, which is really frightening. And it was after the University of Arizona removed the notebook computers and all of that and moved to a virtualization environment, they've now passed all of the security audits since. Is that still true? All right, stand up for just a second. This is one of the guys from University of Arizona who really did this. Thank you, Dimitri, for being here. So this stuff is real. Now, let's talk about TCO, because that's probably, for those of you that have taken a brief nap, wake back up. TCO is critical. Here's the way that you have to look at TCO in this space. First off, I'm showing you a shortened version of the chart we normally show customers. When we show this chart, we show it with 5 different rails. Because what Wise does is supports 5 different models. We support, let me just walk through them briefly for you. We call it session virtualization, which you might think of as Citrix Zen App or Microsoft Remote Desktop Services. That's model 1. Model 2 is VDI, Citrix Zen Desktop, VMware View, Microsoft VDI Suites, a few other cool things in the background. That's model 2. Model 3 we call Cloud PC, and it's fairly new. Cloud PC is a different model than the previous 2 in that those first 2 models are centralized execution architectures, meaning all of your apps are running on the server. That works for most people, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so what the Cloud PC model does is it simply takes a regular PC and yanks out the hard drive and virtualizes it back to the cloud so that your apps continue to run on your PC hardware or on what we call cloud PCs, which are hardware designed specifically for this purpose. No fans, very low energy, and that kind of thing. So this third model is great for those of you that have said, I just can't do the VDI thing, the data center was too expensive or some such thing. This model uses a very tiny data center and a slightly more powerful endpoint. The fourth model is the web. HTML applications everywhere. And this is where I think ultimately we're going to get to in the next 10 years, but it's not practical to do it today. Still, most of the web applications are not as powerful as monolithic, but many of our customers are already going that direction. And the fifth model is the shared PC. There was a lot of sort of funky piratey things going on in the shared PC space over the last couple of years with schools largely putting a PC in, hacking the Windows XP operating system, and then attaching a bunch of really small clients to it. Microsoft didn't really like that too much, and so they pulled in us and our largest competitor to come in and sort of make this right. And so we now support this model with the Microsoft multi-point server technology. And so for very, very tiny companies or schools, this is a terrific model. It's not appropriate for the enterprise. So 5 models that we support, and we analyze to see what makes most sense for you folks. So here's 2 of them, the VDI ones for today. So if you look, the work that we did was with Gartner, and the work focused specifically, we're getting really close to that speaker, on what the cost is per month for these architectures across security, administration, endpoint devices themselves, managing, keeping the lights on. And if you have really good view or you were smart enough to sit up in the front rows, what you see here is that going to, sort of a PC-only model has about a $440 monthly cost, all things considered. I know many of you are saying, I never paid that much for a PC. It's everything involved. And then if you were to take a VDI model and put PCs on it, the number goes up by about 0.3%, which is quite frankly less than you would have thought. When you take that same VDI environment and you replace the PC with a thin client device or a thin device of some sort, the number now drops by about 15%. Now, you say, gosh, that's not really exciting numbers. I only pay a 0.3% penalty to have a PC as the endpoint, and I only gain 15% by putting a thin client in. Jeff, what are you smoking here? Well, the reality is when you take this analysis and you rip out all the wash items are like the applications that are going to cost you the same across models, and other things that are server-oriented but have nothing to do with this model, the numbers get much more interesting, but you have to understand them. And so I made this one bigger. So you can see that what we've done is we've pulled out all of the wash items, and this lets us zoom in and focus on the real differences that are implemented by the endpoint device. And so what you see here is that, sort of the PC is reduced to about $117 a month, but VDI with PCs as the endpoints is $135 a month, or, 15% more cost by using a PC endpoint. When you use a thin client device, that number drops to about $73, rounded up. And so the difference is it's about 37% less or 38% less than this one here. If you simply compare VDI models and saying, I'm going to go do VDI, that's been established. The question is, what is my endpoint? You're looking at about a 47% difference in your cost of ownership just between a PC and a thin endpoint. So it's really important to look at these numbers. If you happen to talk to a wise person, they can show you the much broader spreadsheet that has much more. But if you go to that ROI tool that I gave you on the previous chart, you can go do all this math yourself, and you can see every component of the savings or the cost. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about kind of the 5 components I think are maximum ROI. The first is the server. Servers, what I have found is they've become largely similar. If you're using Cisco versus IBM versus Dell, they're all good servers. Some are better than others. I'm not going to talk too much about the server. Let's talk about the endpoint, one of my favorite topics. There are now a whole host of different types of devices that you can use as endpoints. It's not that sort of one-size-fits-all model that it was 7 years ago. So there are thin client devices, which are the flexible things. For instance, some people think in the market that the zero clients are replacing the thin clients. Not true, not true. Let me sort of disabuse you of that notion. Thin client devices are multi-protocol devices that have an operating system, and there's a whole series of benefits that come from that, like VPN support, like the ability to do rich local web applications, things like that. Zero clients, on the other hand, were architected and built to be dedicated devices for a very particular use that eliminated all of the costs and complexities associated with being multi-protocol, right? And so if you look at the flexible thin client devices here, they can be the little tiny devices. You see those if you checked in for registration or you did your email, you'll see kind of those devices. Then there are mobile devices. They look just like notebook computers. Actually, they're getting better looking. I think the first revision we put out didn't look very good. The second revision looks really nice now. So those are a way to securely access your VMware View or other environment, and you can have it configured with very little software, so it acts as a true thin client, very little storage, or a lot of storage so that you can actually download your virtual machine contents into the device, take it on an airplane, and continue to work in a disconnected mode. You'll hear a lot about that with VMware View this week. High-performance devices. There are specific devices designed for the healthcare industry and the financial services industry that let you do very high resolution, 2560 by 1600 by 2 screens, all digital, or up to 6 displays in these high-performance devices. And then there's two software-only choices. Many of our customers have said, we just blew our entire wad on the licenses for the data center. We can't change out the PCs for thinner devices. And we've got probably another year before we'll be able to do that, maybe 2. And so we introduced a product called Wise PC Extender. PC Extender is a piece of software that simply installs on your existing PC. It eliminates the Microsoft layer. We still love Microsoft, but it eliminates that layer. And it dramatically simplifies the management and security model for the device. And then it lets you access, with very, very high-performance protocols, a VMware, Citrix, or Microsoft cloud environment. So it supports PC over IP and HDX and RDP and all that. So you can use your PCs for longer. And then when they naturally roll over and die or spontaneously catch fire and people are running through the halls, replace them with thin clients at that point. And then, of course, the hardware from Apple, or the Android technology with our software called PocketCloud on it, which turns that device into a really rich and richer everyday thin client device. So you have a lot of options in the thin client spectrum. More recently, you have a lot of options now in the zero client spectrum, but the zero clients are really dedicated for a particular purpose. So you'll see the way we've architected this out. There's something called Zenith, which we introduced this latest May. This is a next generation zero client. Works exclusively with Citrix. You can't use it with anything else. Microsoft, there's a product called the E01, works exclusively with multi-point server. And then the P20 that you see all over the show floor here for VMware View. These are dedicated devices. So now here's sort of point 5 in your strategy. If you know you've already selected your endpoint provider, let's say Citrix, VMware, or Microsoft, and you're going to stay with them, a zero client is a very safe choice and, in fact, probably one of the best economic choices you can make. However, if you think you might be buying Citrix today and VMware tomorrow, or Microsoft 6 weeks later, or another Citrix down further than that, go with a thin client. A thin client is designed to be able to work with all those back ends. A zero client largely is not. All right? So protect yourself. And then at the bottom here is these cloud PCs. Cloud PCs are simply thin client devices with really powerful microprocessors that look a lot like PCs, but they don't have fans and rotating media and security flaws in many ways. And so you have now all of these endpoint options to be able to do this kind of technology. Now, if you're going to pick a thin client, there are a number of different operating systems that could go in them. There is Windows Embedded. There is Linux. There are small operating systems called ThinOS and Zero. And they are distinctly different. And it's important for you to understand the difference. So for those of you that can't see the graph here, Windows Embedded is the best thin client operating system when you need to embed local Windows applications in that thin client device. And there's a lot of people that do that. It's also the best if you want to have a rich, robust local browser for web-based applications. It's terrific for PC over IP today because the PC over IP support in Windows Embedded is some of the very best. right? And it also supports this concept of having multiple protocols, right? A little PC over IP, a little HDX, a little RDP. Linux largely is similar in that respect, except that the local embedded apps are going to be Linux apps or Java apps, that sort of thing. But here's what CIOs are telling me today. They understood that when they were using terminal services or previous versions of Citrix Zen app, that they didn't always have the ability to run all the applications on the server. And so they really needed a PC sort of operating system, a heavy operating system on the endpoint, to get past that. But look at VDI today. VDI today lets you run easily 99-point-something% of the applications that you would want to run, whereas the application compatibility profile for terminal services and Zen app and other things like that is in the high 80s. So now what you really want to do, and many CIOs tell me this, is that I want a television set at the end of the wire accessing my VDI environment. I don't want it to be complicated. I want a television set that relies on a powerful broadcasting station. That's my cloud data center. And when the new fall shows come out in September, I don't want to have to upgrade it. Okay, so good. So that kind of model requires a small operating system or even less than an operating system to be able to deliver that television-like quality, that TV that doesn't need to be secured, it doesn't need to be updated. And this is really important. So that's what these two operating systems down here do. ThinOS is the most popular Windows operating system in the thin client space. We've done about 8 million of those licenses, and it's designed specifically for multi-protocol, zero attack surface, zero management, really, really powerful kind of operating system. We're just introducing ThinOS 7. Everybody's introducing 7 this year. So we're introducing ThinOS 7, which has RDP 7, full HDX, and a whole series of other really cool features, and it's very inexpensive and very fast. Zero, which we just introduced in the product called Zenith, is a zero-client architecture. It's not an operating system. It's actually a specialized technology we built that automatically updates itself to the latest network security protocols and remote display protocols, and so that technology, which is only 4 megabytes large, it's really tiny. It's half the size of the flash of your router, creates our new zero-client family and delivers incredible performance while eliminating the economic costs of securing and managing the device. So choose your operating system well. If you want that TV experience and you choose Windows Embedded, you've got a lot more management work and a lot more securing work than you really need to have, and that means your TCO is going to go up pretty tremendously. So point number 6, don't get a more complicated piece of software in your endpoint than you really need. There needs to be a reason for it, right? Okay? Everybody got the cameras down? Okay. Zero clients. This is sort of a rant of mine, the whole zero client thing, because there are companies in our industry that are running out there saying a zero client is the best solution for everything, and you got to use that. As an engineer, I'm offended by this, because the zero clients that they sell don't do video, don't do wireless, don't do 32-bit color, don't support wireless peripherals, don't support CPA. CPA, you ask? I'll tell you what that is. And they're essentially tinker toys that cost more than our most sophisticated devices that do all of those things I just described. Be very, very careful about vendors hawking the latest and greatest thing, especially if their slide sets don't have a lot of technical data on them, because they're asking you to forget the technical nature of this particular area. I have ripped out more of those so-called zero-client environments and replaced them with our devices than I care to mention, but it's a lot. Here's the difference. If you look at these kinds of devices, sort of what we call the first-generation zero clients, they were well-intended devices. The idea is that let's eliminate all the software from the endpoint device so that you have nothing to manage or secure. It's the right idea, but the implementation didn't work. We did this in Wise Labs, and in fact, we introduced a technology called Nano within the Wise Labs, and we chose not to bring it to market because it fundamentally failed on the can I keep the device around for 8 years model. We actually OEM'd this technology to another thin client company who sells it today, and I'm not going to tell you who they are, but the point is that we opted to throw it away. And here's the thing you need to know. In a zero-client product, you need to have about 95% hardware and about 5% software. Because here's what you know will change. You know the protocols for the vendors will change. It's a God-given conclusion. And you know that security models will change, right? When was the last time your security concepts were stable for more than 3 years? It just isn't true. If you're going to keep these devices on the desktop for 8 years, you've got to pick something that has the ability to move forward in time. And so the architecture that we introduced in May, which is currently available on Zenith products, and I think you can expect to see some more from us over time, is very, very different from that first generation. First generation devices have some of the benefits for performance, but they really fall apart in supporting 64-bit operating systems and sort of rich networks. The new technology is instant on. These devices turn on and give you your login for your virtual environment in less than 10 seconds. Compare that to sitting around for 2 or 3 minutes while the device starts up. From a simplicity standpoint, actually, from a performance standpoint, let's go back. Full USB 2.0 support, full webcam support, all that kind of stuff. These are things you should now expect from your vendors. Don't let them get away with, we can do video if it's only this big. From a simplicity standpoint, we automatically detect the server. So when you take it out of the box, you plug it in, we figure out your server, we connect to your server. You don't have to have a smart person install this device at all. My dad can install this. And it also updates itself automatically within the first 10 seconds of its connecting. So if there's a newer engine, it pulls it down. It takes 2.5 seconds. You'll never even notice it happens. And then lastly, don't buy a zero client that forces you to install a bunch of software on the server. Talk about vendor lock-in. It's just a bad idea. That software can also destabilize your virtualization environment. And when it does, your virtualization vendor is going to do this, right? So avoid that at all costs. You want a plug-and-play technology that uses the base protocols, PC over IP for VMware, HDX for Citrix, RDP for Microsoft, RemoteFX as well, right? And then lastly, longevity. This is the key point. Don't buy a device that you're ultimately going to have to forklift out after 2 or 3 years because you haven't really gained anything from a PC in that regard. The big CapEx benefit in this model comes when you're able to keep the device on the desk for 8 years. Now, we have customers like Labatt's Brewery who have kept the same thin client devices on the desk for 13 years. So it can be done, folks. So make sure that it accepts new protocol changes, right? Protocols change. You want to be able to get the benefit of that. Make sure that network security changes are supported as well. And lastly, make sure you get a device that connects over LANs, WANs, or Wi-Fi. So that's sort of my how to, somebody asked, how to compare a zero client to a thin client. It's the zero client to zero client comparison you have to be most afraid of. All right. So we talked a little bit about server and endpoint. Let's talk about energy. You really want to be able to tell the right story for your CFO with regard to energy. And I talked about that $70 to $150 per month savings, and that is a real savings. So you kind of start there. The other benefit is that these devices last twice as long, so you've got another benefit there, less landfill, but you also have to take into account that they use about 2 pounds of material, maybe 3 pounds of material, versus 20 pounds of material, which is the average in a PC. So when you chuck one of these little thin client devices out, you're chucking out very, very little stuff to harm the environment, whereas when you chuck a PC out, it's a much bigger sort of deal, right? So all of these things combine to deliver a better energy benefit that is dollars and cents measurable, but also a better economic story for your company to tell. In fact, one of the power companies who are our customers did a whole advertising campaign talking about how they were eating their own dog food and saving their own energy because they had moved to a virtualized environment with thin client devices. And so you could do the same thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about user experience. This is my favorite topic, and I'm going to go through it really fast because we're running out of time. Nearly every thin client on the planet will support a single monitor. All of ours support, well, 2. And so that's important. But if you're virtualizing something like Windows XP in the data center and you're using, let's say, RDP 5.2, you power these bad boys up and you're going to see something like this. The system doesn't actually know that you have 2 screens. It just thinks you have one really wide screen. So there is technology available today, if you see this sort of thing from us and others, that will properly set up the displays so that they will be perceived as 2 independent displays. But if your vendor can't do it, toss them. Next, USB peripherals. Everybody know what this is? This is a USB fan. My biggest competitor, just a few short years ago, used this as the way to demonstrate that the USB ports in their thin clients worked. I almost fell out of my seat. We thought that was kind of stupid. And so our technology is designed to work with the majors to support all of the different kinds of devices that you might want to plug in, even these like handheld presenters that I'm using right now to advance my slides. And if you have one of those uncool media players sitting around or one of the cool ones, we can support all of that. Everything from syncing your phone to making your technology work. And this is an important distinction as well. Point 7. Don't use a USB virtualization technology that does not allow you to lock out or lock in USB devices by vendor and type. You need to have those two things. You might want to have SanDisk USB sticks work. You might want to have a different vendor not work, right? And so you need to have a technology that supports that. Make sure that the management level in the thin client device allows you to lock in or lock out devices by PID, VID, product ID, vendor ID. Those are the two critical strings that exist in all USB devices that help Microsoft plug-and-play technology know which driver to use. You can also filter by that information. So you can make sure that people, if you want to really enable USB peripherals, you may not want people plugging in their iPhones, or you may not want them sort of bringing in their own things from home. You can lock those things out very specifically. The more coarse management models will not give you that benefit. The other thing is, a lot of companies are now talking about being able to do this, but where they stop short is they're not able to deliver isochronous USB devices. Isochronous, you say? Isochronous devices are devices that are timing dependent, like USB headsets and webcams. And so you want to make sure that you ask the vendor, can I do webcams across a variety of vendors? If they come back and we support all of the Logitech webcams, but nobody else's, run away screaming, right? So you want virtualization technology that is performance-based. Multimedia. Okay, so everybody here on the floor can display a small display of multimedia. And I suppose that's useful. And we can too. But the problem really is that's not what it's about. You need to be able to, if you're not using multimedia today, you will be using it in the 8 years that you're going to put this thing on the desk, right? So be thinking forward on this. You don't want to just be able to buy a device that lets you show a 3-inch by 3-inch window of multimedia at probably less than 30 frames per second. You want to be able to watch the whole darn Star Wars movie on your thin client if you therefore want to. Now, you smart engineering types are saying, I would never let my users watch Star Wars on their thin clients because my network would be completely destroyed. Okay, but there's an architecture for that. And in fact, this is point 8. You absolutely must get your multimedia strategy right for your endpoints or you're toast. Because, let me show you. There are two ways to handle multimedia. There is render it on the server and send it to the endpoint. Okay, so that means that we're using the CPU on the server to do all the media decoding. And we're moving it into a different form that the endpoint can understand. And then we're going to stream it frame by frame to the endpoint. Okay. A lot of people will tell you that this is the right answer. They say that this simplifies things. This says that I'm really centralizing everything, right? Okay. And then there's the other way to do it. Send it to the endpoint and let it render there. I mean, take the whole darn video file, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 megs, whatever it is, wrap it up like a file and fire it down the wire, let the thin client deal with it. Anybody, let's take a quick show of hands. Yeah, I know, nobody wants to raise their hands for these kinds of things. But, quick show of hands. Who thinks Model 1 is the better one? Okay. Who thinks Model 2 is the better one? How many of you won't raise your hand no matter what I ask? Okay. All right, I can live with that. Here's what you need to understand. This is a very tricky part. There are good, smart technical people that will argue you either way. Let me give you data. So what we did in Wise Labs is that we wanted to solve this problem. It was one of the key user experience problems we had to solve to sell more thin clients. So it was a totally mercenary sort of activity. We took a 720 kilobit per second video file, and in this particular case, we were using Citrix Zen Desktop, and we were virtualizing Windows XP. There you go. And so, I'm sorry, this was done in VMware in Windows XP. I apologize, different slide. So the 720 kilobit per second video file is playing now on the user's desktop, and this is what's happening in the server. Now you see two lines above me. You see a blue line, which is the CPU activity for that particular virtual machine, which is being used to decode the video locally. Below it, you see a yellow line. The yellow line is the network. That's the network utilization as the frames are moved across the wire one by one. So what's happening is that your server's taking the entire brunt of this multimedia decoding. Now, all right, let's go to Model 2. Model 2 is what WISE calls collaborative processing architecture. It's an intelligent handshaking architecture that says you should render over here, you should render over there, based on the file type. So you take that same 720 kilobit per second WMV file and run it through that second model with collaborative processing architecture, and you get this. Really different. For those of you in the front row, again, congratulations for your choice of seating. You'll see the spike you see in the blue line is the Microsoft Media Player itself starting up. And then what you see is a spike in the yellow line. That's us moving the physical video file from point A to point B and letting it render on the client device. When you do this, your network and your server go completely quiet. Okay, I guess that's interesting. Why do I care? Here's why you care. Because we took a Dell 2950 quad-core server, and we were able to completely swamp it with only 15 users running various multimedia files. When we established that Model 2 for delivering multimedia, collaborative processing architecture, the number of users that particular server, where it was able to deliver good responsiveness to, shot up to 70. Right? And so this is a critical point for you. Per Jeff's opinion, don't use devices that force you to render all your video on the server, because your server scalability is going to suffer. If you work for a big server company, the big server companies love Model 1. You want to save money? Model 2. Okay? All right, so let's talk about delivering web video. Most people believe web video can't be accelerated, but it can. So here's my little model. Here's my endpoint client. I've got my web. I'm connected by a WAN. And this is my VMware server or Citrix server or what have you. Right? So under the standard protocols, the way that these devices deliver web-based video, where I'm going out onto the internet and I'm looking at a web page, is that the request goes out, it gets processed by the server, it gets delivered off to the web, it has a little bit of a conversation between the two, and up comes my video after some buffering. Now what you'll notice is, if this guy was a moving picture, there's a lot of activity. The server's very, very involved in the processing of each of the frames that come in. And that's just because of the way that the protocols work. You want to avoid this if possible. Using collaborative processing architecture, because the endpoint device understands the video and has the local codecs in it, it can talk to the website directly. When that happens, the video request goes out like it did in the past model, but now the video streams directly to the endpoint device. Again, dropping the server out of the equation entirely, giving you better server scalability. Right? So you've got to make sure that you're handling that kind of process to deliver sort of the maximum capability on your server. See, it's sleeping already. It's just doing video all crazy. Let me give you one more example that I think is important. Remember I mentioned Jewelry Television earlier. So Jewelry TV has 300 users in a call center. I'll grab 6 of them. They have their server, and they have their web-based media controller, which is delivering the live video feed of the channel, which every member of the call center has to be watching, just so they know. And so the way this works is that the video stream comes in under standard protocols. It's about a megabit per second, in fact. And so you've got that 1 megabit per second. It gets processed by the server, but because it's multicast video and the virtualization environments can't accept multicast video natively, it breaks it up into a whole slew of unicast streams, all of which are identical. So instead of having one megabit stream that goes to all of the users, you have now 6 1 megabit streams. Now imagine you had 300 users or 2,000 users or more. Your networks blow up. You have to be able to select endpoint devices that understand multicast video, because that way you get an environment, sorry, I'll catch up to myself. You'll get an environment where multicast video bypasses the server and goes right to the endpoint. That way, once again, server scalability is enhanced and network scalability is dramatically enhanced. If you get these things wrong, you will pay way too much money, you'll deliver really crummy performance, and you'll get fired. Okay, maybe that's too draconian, but you get the idea. Now, security is becoming increasingly important. Make sure that you get a thin client device that supports security. It's smart card, biometric, the CAC cards used in the government. Always ask your vendor, do you support that? Important point to ask. All right, so we've kind of hit some of these basic points. Let me give you the last point. The last point is about delivering really good performance over long distance. And I talked a little bit about this before we started officially. This whole idea of what we call the private cloud problem. Now, this is actually based on some work we did with Barclays Bank. Barclays Bank had an issue where they wanted to move from a large variety of data centers to a much smaller variety. And because they told us, for every data center they shut down, they save $1 billion. Okay, got my attention. So the idea was, how do you reduce the amount of data centers that are needed? Well, you have to be able to deliver a rich user experience across a very long network. All right, so they had this problem where they were dealing with latency and packet loss that was preventing the proper utilization of their services. Now, there's also this other thing called the public cloud problem. You're not experiencing it yet, but you will. The public cloud problem here, I'm picking on Amazon. Here's the AWS map. Amazon's point of presence, one of them is in Virginia and the other is in Dublin, Ireland. And so if you're in those two locations, your performance on the public cloud is really good. But as you move away from those spaces, because of latency and packet loss, performance declines. So you're in great shape if you're sort of in the little dot. You're in good shape if you're in green. It gets worse in yellow, and it's really bad everywhere else. And that you can see these latencies that change. And so we wanted to solve this problem, and we wanted to do it in a way that was not involving a lot of hardware. Because we saw that you were already buying hardware, let's just put some more smarts in the hardware you're already buying. So rather than buying hardware-based network accelerators, which, trust me, these are really just sort of caching devices that do HTML traffic very well, but they can't do non-predictive traffic. And non-predictive traffic, of course, is PC over IP, which, quite frankly, doesn't need these technologies to begin with, but HDX and RDP. And so we took, in fact, a test with real customers, and over the period of different levels of latency, the RDP protocol actually breaks down pretty dramatically as you introduce latency into the line. And so what we want to do is take a software solution to solve that. Don't go out and buy $1 million worth of hardware. Get an endpoint device that has the technology in it already to do this. And so there's a thing called WISE Virtual Desktop Accelerator. It's a little piece of software built into the thin client. When it comes, it's not turned on. If you want it turned on, throw some money at us. We'll turn it on. And what it does is it dramatically changes the way that the device responds to long networks, in that it neutralizes up to nearly a second of latency, believe it or not, and up to 0.5% of packet loss. And it does this with 3 really clever technologies. It uses dynamic window sizing, so we automatically measure the amount of latency in the real line. We size all the windows appropriately for that, so we optimize that channel. We then do collision control and congestion control, so that we make sure that if you're using a particular network, that you're maximizing your use of the network while still sharing bandwidth with other devices. And the third thing, which is the magic of this technology, is we can dynamically recreate lost packets. It's like ECC memory for your network. TCP/IP, when it loses a packet, it stops and retransmits, and that just takes a lot of time. This eliminates that because it never sees that it lost a packet. So it's cool technology. It has a real big effect on these different protocols. This happens to be RDP, low latency, higher latency, insane latency, some big changes. This is based on doing file copies, and then even bigger improvements doing other sorts of things, right? Dynamic applications over long distances. So if your application is you're going to put a server in California and you want it to work well in Australia, don't go buy a bunch of data hardware. Buy just a really good endpoint device. So a little bit about us. We're now coming to the end of our show. We've been doing this for longer than anyone else. We've invented most of the technology. We have all the patents. Over 200 million people touch our devices every day. We've sold 20 million of them. So that's pretty common. We're the only company that has this combination of the right partners. We work with all of the leaders, Microsoft, Citrix, VMware, Google, Apple, Cisco, and Avaya, to deliver this cloud client computing model I've been telling you about. We have cloud software, virtualization software, and management software to really complete the equation. I'll show you what that means. And we have the broadest set of firmware that you can put in a client device so that you don't make some of these mistakes I talked about today. And then lastly, all the right different hardware devices themselves, whether you want a desktop device, a mobile device, or something in your hand. So if you look at these models, you get to pick the server, put in an endpoint device that's going to deliver you real security benefits, but then you need to do things that are going to improve performance, sort of optimize, accelerate performance over long networks, simplify management, and give you a really good disaster recovery solution, as well as reduce tier 1 storage needs. All of these sorts of things are what we do to complete the equation. It's not just sort of the basic, here's your thin client, thanks for playing. If you look at the numbers, this happens to be the first calendar quarter of this year, which was the latest data available when I made this slide set. And over time, what you'll see is there's really 2 major competitors in the space. There's certainly HP, and there's us. We continue. This is you read that sort of this direction. We've been growing lately, I think, based on a lot of things. And then there's a lot of other vendors who are good people, but well, you know. So sorry for that. So there's a lot of components to ROI if you're really going to do this correctly. There's more than the ones I've described, but I hope this has given you an idea of some of the real places you can fall into and do a crummy job of VDI. I have seen a lot of vendors and a lot of customers make these kinds of mistakes. The user experience is the killer. If you can't get user experience right, you'll get an uproar in sort of a cultural backlash that'll make you look foolish. Don't make that mistake. When you get user experience right, this deploys nicely, right? So you got to have choices. We'll give those choices. Come and see all of our stuff at the Wise booth. Margaret, come on up and let's give away some stuff. So here's what we're doing. We're giving away 3 of these, 3 or 4? 4 of these bad boys, and a Wise mobile thin client. Now, I was hoping I was going to be able to hand them to you as you run out the door. I can't. We're going to send them to you because the Apple store was a little slow. All right, got your tickets in hand.